It's Ceci Stallsmith. I'm very, very grateful to be here today. Thank you, GitLab and General Catalyst. All right, so I'm going to let our panel introduce themselves. I am a director of marketing at Slack. I've been there over 4 years at this point. And we've got Tien, Hubert, Dylan, and Priyanka. And I will let them give sort of their 15 to 30-second bios, and then we'll get into the fun of remote work and collaboration tools, which we're all building. Go ahead, Tien.
Hi, thanks. My name is Tien. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. So I started out building a video game company, all remote. Along the way, we ended up pivoting to sort of enterprise software. We were using HipChat at the time, and it was, the whole company ran on it. We were all remote, and HipChat started breaking down. And it started crashing, and we had lost data, and we were really upset. So then we tried to export, and they wouldn't let us export. And then when we stopped paying our subscription, they paywalled us from our own data. And we were just really upset that this core piece of infrastructure didn't work for us. But we were building video games, and we had 10 million hours in our own messaging app in the video games, so we just started using that. And then we ended up open sourcing it, and then it kind of became sort of a business. We had a lot of large enterprises want to host their own messaging service. So that became Mattermost. It became an open source project. You can try it out with GitLab Omnibus. It's packaged in there. Is integrated with GitLab, and that's kind of the story of our company. So it's for Mattermost, and it's really about an open source messaging platform.
Hi, I'm Hubert. Does this work? Can you hear me?
We're starting to.
Okay, I'm Hubert. I live here, but I'm from Prague, the Czech Republic originally. I'm the founder and CEO of productboard, which is a product management system. Think of it as CRM for your product decision making. We centralize feedback and research from your customers, insights from support tickets and other conversations that you have on the front lines of the company, and then help you tie it to kind of a structure of everything that you could ever build. But then we can give you a framework to figure out what is it you should prioritize given your strategic product objectives.
Given your strategic product objectives, to make sure that what ends up on your roadmap are actually the most important things. A lot of companies focus the long-term product vision with what is it that you should build next. And so we help in that way. And then we integrate with Jira's and other engineering task management systems farther down the process. We are distributed between Prague, the Czech Republic, where I'm from, and my co-founder is, and we have an office here, 110 people, 30 here, 80 in Prague. We'll probably get to it. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Dylan Field. Can you all hear me? Hopefully, yes. My name is Dylan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Figma. Bio before this is very short. I was an intern before starting Figma 7 years ago. And the Figma is a collaborative design tool. I think hopefully some of you use it. If you use Figma, oh, sweet. Awesome. Okay, so in the center they use Figma, on the sides not. We'll get you to. We're a collaborative design tool. You can kind of think of it like Photoshop meets Google Docs, and we're trying to make it so that designers, engineers, product managers, and copywriters more can all get inside one source of truth on the web.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Priyanka. I'm Director of Technical Evangelism at GitLab. So, oh, that doesn't work? Okay. Hello? All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Priyanka. I'm Director of Technical Evangelism at GitLab. GitLab is a commercial open source company, and we are a complete DevOps platform that's delivered as a single application. We have millions of users and lots of customers, and people can use us for any and all parts of the software development and delivery lifecycle. I also serve on the board of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is the home for open source projects like Kubernetes, Prometheus, Jaeger, Fluentd, etc. So that's me. Hi, everyone.
Great, thank you. So just to start, everyone here is building very, very collaborative software. I'm curious, when you think about how you're actually building the product, how much are you thinking about remote teams and remote workers or distributed workforces versus just building a highly collaborative product? Where are you factoring that in, or are you not? Dylan, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, first off, just to give context, Figma is not a super remote team yet. We have a few people in Amsterdam, a few people remote on Pacific time zone, and one guy in Toronto. Otherwise, everyone's here. But I think if you're working on a collaborative product, as soon as you're in different rooms, you can start testing. Because if people are async, if they're on different sort of work schedules, and you need to have synchronous experiences, even if you're in the same conference room and can't see the same TV, or it's just too far away. So I think we do think about it from the start, and we definitely test it out, and that's a big part of our product development process, is making sure that we take feedback from remote teams, which is a huge amount of teams that are using Figma, but it's not necessarily dog food that way yet.
Cool. That's really helpful. So the async element is really how you see that remote element coming to life.
I think async or even synchronous communication. So for example, in Figma, one case that we see live all the time inside of the company is in design reviews. And we'll often do design reviews in a big room. We have one person in the Amsterdam area that's calling in. And then we also have everyone in the room, and some people can't even see the screen. So you're able to follow in Figma if you click on someone's avatar or their picture, then it'll actually lock your viewport to theirs. As they move around the screen, you can see what they're seeing. And that's really helpful for the synchronous case as well, whether you're remote or in person.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. Anyone else? Thoughts on how you develop product in a remote world?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. So GitLab is an all-remote company, and we're almost 1,000. As I speak, maybe we are over 1,000. Who knows? It's moving really fast. So GitLab runs on GitLab. So by default, in our product planning, in our roadmap, that essence is there because we're going to be using our same product, and we are all remote. That doesn't mean that the product doesn't serve, people who have offices. That's definitely not the case, as our customer base suggests. But yes, everything we do, because we work on our own product, means that people around the world need to be able to use it. That means asynchronous is very important. That means that it's important for everybody to be on the same page without having to have a conversation about it. So openness is critical. And then also having the right guardrails is very important. So that's baked into our life and heavily influences what's built.
Yeah, very interesting.
In our case, we build a lot of the functionality so that everything's real-time synced. So even though we don't share the viewport, but if you move a feature up or down, everybody else see it moving real-time. And then in our case, it's not that much about the synchronous communication as it is about making sure that the right pieces of information get to the right people, and then how the team is structured, where they are, if it's the same room or not. It's more making sure that the product decision makers are exposed to the right insights and that they really have a good shared understanding of what is it that people need. And so that's what the system, distributed or not, but the right people get the right information.
Yeah.
And is that what you're building into your product? How do you do that? Because that's so hard.
No, we are. Look, support people, they read conversation, and there's a key insight, they push it, they tag it, structure it. We have a portal for our customers, and we have 2,300 companies as customers. There's a lot of insights. And that's as I can imagine for all of us, right, in this world where we're distributed, but there's just much more and many more conversations happening that the companies have with their end customers. And so that's the challenge. How do you kind of get the front lines of the company to surface the important things and say hey, this is important.
Yeah.
Product team, you should know it. You should be aware. And so we all live in product board.
Yeah.
You all should too, by the way.
And the bigger you get, the harder in some ways it gets.
I do. Sorry, I know
Yeah,
you were
go
ready
ahead.
to move to the next question, but I did want to point out, being an open core company which has a vibrant open source community, adds to this dynamic very interestingly at GitLab. So we co-create with our users and customers, and it's all open, right? Issue board. Everybody can see what the issue boards are and what the roadmaps are. So people will jump in and share what they would like to see, or even contribute it back to us, and that I think creates this dynamic of we're all just in sync all the time, working towards this large shared goal beyond just GitLab. It's everybody who's in our wider community that participates. So that kind of adds a layer to our product
the
development.
community is sort of a part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would add is that I think GitLab has this great thing called boring solutions, which is that just if it's out there, and just use it, right? So I think we definitely use a lot out of the GitLab handbook, and when we think about all the things GitLab does, it's almost becomes start with GitLab as a default, right? And then if you can add value and iterate and do it our own way, that's great. But there's so much stuff that's sort of boring, and it just works, and you kind of do it. And then from us, we kind of have, like, there's a lot of, different products out there, but then we can really focus. We have this concept of like conservation of innovation, which is that when you're building things for remote folks, like there's just very standard things, and then we can add something that's different. So what we've added, for example, is that problem that we have, like too many channels and all this stuff going on. The biggest problem we found is that it's like you have to be in too many channels. So one thing that we have is like this concept of hashtags. So like you can tag different posts, and then people can kind of see across and like, okay, like there's this one person, he just writes tweets, right? And it's sort of like, okay, instead of everyone coming here to the tweet channel and telling you what to do, every time there's something interesting, just do like hashtag like maybe tweet, right? And then this person can get like all across. They don't have to be in all the channels, right? They just get this little like cross message.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because I feel like a lot of our products are experimenting as we think about different geographies using a product with different ontologies for information. So, for example, at Figma right now, we're thinking a lot about kind of to your point almost around people and how do you get information to them. The file structure for us has not been really, it's not the perfect metaphor. People are not able to remember files. If I ask you like 2 years ago, what file did you work on? I doubt you could tell me. But if I ask you, okay, 2 years ago, who were you working with? What projects were you working on? How the people that you're working with make you feel? Like that, you could tell me. And so we're kind of trying to experiment with profiles, different project views that can give the most recent information. I think it's similar to what you're saying with hashtags in terms of how do you take all this free-flowing information that's happening everywhere and sort it and organize it.
Yep, you start with the boring solution, here's files, right? And you're like, okay, well, what's broken about that? And that's where you add value. And you can do a lot more, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was an interesting transition for me when I went from Box eventually to Slack, moving from a file paradigm to a messaging paradigm. And it's like, oh, communication ends up being the common denominator of what we're doing, and that's either project-based or people-based, to what you just said, Dylan. So Ian, a question for you. I'm curious, so the goal of your product, both of our products, is this asynchronous communication. Are you trying to make it feel more natural or trying to introduce a new paradigm that people should work into? How do you think about that?
I think that people, like this whole generation has grown up with, actually, let me just, it's not, I guess the question is, what's a new paradigm?
Yeah.
And the theme of remote work, I'll tell you the extreme example is like my co-founder who, he's in Seattle, right? And he's got 4 kids, and they're like homeschooled, right? So, and their school's on the East Coast, and they wake up at like 6 a.m. and they like learn Latin, right? And they do it with like kids that are like
8 years of Latin.
Yep.
Rock on.
Agricola est. That's all I remember. So then they're homeschooled and they're having classes with like friends in Kenya, and afterwards they go and they play Minecraft together, right? And like that's sort of like is that the new normal? Like what's happening there? And then the grandparents are like, what's going on? Like you're homeschooling, that's so weird. And it's like their dad is upstairs running a company from like his computer, right? So the question is what's new, and I think we live in this world where like there's a generation of people who just grew up on texting and emojis and just like it's just part of how you express yourself with like GIFs and all these pieces, and it's not so much that it's new, it's just sort of like it's this segment of how people communicate, and it's very different than people who are used to like, well, I have Outlook and I have my rules and I have my email and what's this messaging? It's so confusing. And I think it's really just a change in demographics. I think every 6 to 8 years, you see a transformation in how people communicate, whether it's email to instant messaging to video conferencing to like mobile. And this is just sort of like the latest sort of wave. And I think it's not really, to some extent, there's innovation and you're adding value on top of the boring solutions, but like the boring solutions now are just kind of standard.
Yeah. In some ways, you could argue that it is more natural. We're moving towards what's more natural. Because we've had these technological paradigms.
Yeah, it's just not in the workplace yet, right?
Yeah.
Like you grew up with it, and there's the chocolate swirl emoji, and it's just part of like the diction, right? And you bring that in the workplace.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Very cool. So Dylan Hubert, very curious how you think the product and design functions specifically have evolved given remote work.
I can take design, you take product?
Sure.
Okay.
Kind of makes sense.
Then we'll have a debate about which ones mean what. I think, the context for design in the first place is that design has just changed so much over the past decade. I think if you kind of zoom out and ask why there's so many designers today relative to 10 years ago. For example, like IBM, when we started Figma in 2012, IBM was at 72 engineers to every one designer across the company. And then in 2017, 5 years later, they were at 8 engineers to every one designer across the company and 3 to 1 on mobile.
Wow.
And so there's this dramatic shift happening, and 6 to 1, 8 to 1, that's like what we're seeing across most companies now. And people are even trying to be more aggressive and find more designers. And so the question is kind of, well, why? And I think that the reason is that, and this is true for product too, as it becomes easier to build things, it's no longer enough that you built it. And I think the reason it's becoming easier is AWS Cloud, App Store distribution models, no-code, low-code solutions, whatever you can point at there, it's definitely becoming easier. It's not enough just to build it. It has to be well-designed as well. And so, first of all, I think that to get back to your question, people are trying to find design talent everywhere. And this is true for all talent, but I think especially design, which is a huge talent crunch right now. And so that's one area we're seeing. And I think in addition to that, design is increasingly becoming both async, and then people are trying to figure out how to do that synchronously as well. And there's a lot of designers going from more brand to product design as well. I think that I'd be curious what you think about this. I think that a lot more designers are starting to act like product people, and the lines are getting very blurry. But I'm not sure that's specific to remote work. I think that's just a more general trend as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the product world, we kind of been through the waves of engineering-driven companies, sales-driven companies, and then product-led is a thing. And we're definitely riding the wave, right? That the product decision makers, and I agree with you that it doesn't have to be the title of product manager, but the person's making the product decision, whether it's a designer or in some cases it is engineers. But we're kind of, I feel like we understand now better the technology, and we have more understanding of what's feasible. And that's historically that wasn't the case. That's why engineering roles would be making a lot of the decisions. But now it's much more about making sure that you understand the needs of the people really well. And I think that that's what's shared about design and product management, that only if you really understand well what is the person need, then you're going to design something. In product management, the way I see the difference between product management and design, that product managers are much more responsible for assessing the market opportunity, whereas you can design something which is for a market of one, and it can be incredible design, but from the business perspective, from a product management perspective, you wouldn't do that because opportunity cost is high. But then it's collaborative.
Yep.
Product design, engineering, I think of it as a trinity and triad, and it just needs to be super tight.
Yeah, to that point, I think one thing that's interesting for both our companies is that more and more people want to be involved in that process than ever before. And they're looking for a way to pitch in and to collaborate with other stakeholders, and they need a place to do that. And I think that's sort of the wave that both of us are riding right now.
Oh, as someone who's led a product marketing team for a while, product marketing wants to inform all of this and say, we have the voice of the customer. So I totally hear you on that.
Yep.
People want to be involved with informing how that gets done.
And also it leads to better outcomes. I think it's not just like a selfish thing, but better for the company too.
Totally. So let's start with Priyanka on this question. Where are you seeing real road bumps for remote workers still, especially from a technology perspective? So what technologies are just making things a little more difficult still for distributed teams, especially as you are an entirely distributed team? Where do you guys feel points of friction and tension, and where are there opportunities potentially for people to build into and improve the experience of a distributed team?
Sure. I don't think this is necessarily a technology issue, but time zones. So, can somebody please solve that, right?
Yes.
That would be a great product. Because for us, we are everywhere around the world, and for me, in my work, it works pretty well with most of Europe. It works pretty well with obviously all of the Americas. Asia Pac is where it gets challenging because somebody is staying up late or waking up really early, and we're experimenting with lots of different ways to see how to solve that issue, but not quite there yet. And I think some way of collaborating across time zones, which async works fine, but when you do need to have that Zoom call or talk on Slack, that's when it gets a little challenging. So that's one thing, and I know that's not exactly a tooling issue, it's a life issue right now.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to like make a leap in the technology we all use to get there. But besides that, I think you guys alluded to it a little bit of like surfacing the right information. So the handbook was brought up. It's at this point over 3,000 pages. That's a lot of pages. I haven't read all of it. I wish I could, but you know, not there yet. I have lots of bedtime reading. But so just surfacing the right information quickly, I think can be really helpful. We're partially making progress together. That search helps with that. But I love that hashtag idea. That seems super cool. But yeah, I think that's a big one.
Great. Anyone else have a thought that jumps to mind on that question? It's a hard one.
I mean, time zone, I get up at 5 every day because we have a big office in Europe. I just think that we're trying to place the people that are working on the same problem close together. So I think that, even like we're building now more product teams here in the US, and the idea is that they're just going to be focused on different areas so that they can effectively communicate. But then obviously you still use the overlap that you have to kind of cross-pollinate and make sure that the teams learn from each other. But like to have like I don't know how you do it if you have like across time zone fully distributed teams that work on the same problem. Then I find it brutal.
I was talking to a CEO yesterday, and he was saying, the product is working on Wednesday, but then I have an engineer in New Zealand, and he pushed something overnight, and now it's all broken. So it is a definite problem and challenge. I'm curious, for building out a distributed team, do you think that you need to start at the baseline with the culture of the team, or do you think the tools are what's going to really enable the team to work effectively together? The answer is probably something around both,
Right.
but where would you bias? Let's start. You started as a remote company, so.
I think it's really the culture.
Yeah.
So culture is, so I come from video games, right? So there's a concept of like, sort of like nerfs and buffs, right? Nerf is like you kind of take that, you go down a notch, and buff is you kind of go up a notch. So your culture is the set of nerfs and buffs. When you have a culture that is rewards, so the biggest thing is get rid of the office, right? And if you don't have an office, then everyone's distributed and everyone's equal. And we did get an office in San Francisco. And for a time, it's sort of like, well, people are really worried about it, right? They're like, okay, what's the conversation happening in there? And then you sort of like, you reward people that are in the office, and then by default, like the people outside the office are sort of brought down a notch. So I think the most important thing is not so much so the tools will kind of come, you'll fix that problem, but the idea of like there's not a physical headquarters, that's not where the decisions are made. Like if I'm not in that room, I still have impact and I still have a voice. I think the culture is the most important thing, and people will and there's lots and lots of tools people can use to be successful.
Yeah.
But I think culture is the heart, and it's really what is encouraged and what is discouraged.
Great.
I think a word that we should add to this conversation is process. Sid says process gets a bad rap. And that's true. Like most people hear the word process like puke. But in reality, and this happened at GitLab from the stories I've heard, is that because we were all distributed, we had to write down what are the steps to do X, Y, and Z. And so they're like, you're building the culture by writing down a process using a tool. And so the three things have to come together, in my opinion, to actualize the company.
That makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, this is a question from the audience. For an early stage startup, what are the 3 to 5 tools that you'd recommend to run a remote team that like are necessary?
Build on GitLab. Everybody.
So GitLab. Any other thoughts, theses?
Well, we have 4 panelists. I'm sure we can just each recommend
you
our
can
tools.
use each of their products. Okay, let's get a little more theoretical. If you were to say, like, here's the baseline of what I think you need just to run a business effectively for a small, earlier stage company.
Yeah, I think it's simple. You need docs, you need voice and video, and you need messaging. So I think those are the 3 categories for everybody. And it's weird because like email's not on that list, right? Like email you need if you're like doing a lot of external stuff, but like there's people that work without touching their email boxes, right? Especially in dev, right? They're like an email. A server's down. But you can get those notifications now in the messaging piece. So that's what we're finding is that messaging, voice, video, docs.
There's there's also, when you're thinking about your tech stack piece of the puzzle, I think from a theory, I know I said go build GitLab, I stand by that, but the meta point there is that it's important to think through what do you want to spend your time on? Do you want to build your own a software development delivery lifecycle? Do you want to actually build your own tools? Which seems pretty wasteful if, let's say, you're building, I actually know this nonprofit that's trying to predict how many opioid sort of antidotes that the emergency responders need to take in their vehicles every day using machine learning on data, like public data sets. For them, they want to focus on that, right? And so spending time, for example, crafting their CI/CD pipelines from scratch may be a total waste of time. And that's where like a tool or platform like GitLab has been really useful, because you sort of get everything in one place and you focus on what's important to you. And then obviously you communicate about all those things using messaging and docs and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to think of like a way to answer the question without going into like specific tool recommendations. And I think one thing that probably all of us would agree on is, if your company's not distributed yet, it will be. If your company's growing, eventually you'll have multiple offices and you'll have remote team members. This is like the inevitable truth for all of us here in the audience. And I think if you're going with tools that are like offline, not cloud-based, single player, and not with remote work in mind, that's like pretty clearly the wrong decision. So that's one way I would think about it as well, in evaluating what tools you use.
Yeah.
I just mentioned that spend time thinking about the tools, because it's not just the tools, it's kind of what you mentioned, the process. It comes with the set of best practices and kind of the knowledge around it. And sometimes you are better off with a tool that's more mature, that comes with the guidance and helps the teams. And so it is also thinking about what skills and expertise you have with the people that you have on the team. And that goes two ways, right? You can kind of get a system that helps you get better in something because your team is not that sophisticated there yet. But then also don't go too far that you get a tool that you don't have nobody know how to use it really, right? And, and then there's the balance between how early stage this tool is versus how sophisticated I need to as I grow, and will I need to switch my CRM at some point, and like all that stuff.
As you grow, things will just break. So
let me just give you one. Let me give you two that are counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Right. The two counterintuitive one is like, well, speakerphones are horrible, right, for remote work, right? Because like that really says you're in an office and you're like, and like someone's not in the office, and it's like side conversations and people on the speakerphone are like, what is going on? So speakerphones are horrible for remote work. The other one's horrible for remote work, I think, is ring cams, right? Ring cams, people are like, oh, I can see everyone in the frickin' office, right? So when you have a ring cam, people's faces are like this big, right? And you're like, oh, what do you think? It's like, I have no relationship with you. You're like 18 pixels wide. So I think a great habit from really great remote companies is that, well, not having an office, so you don't have a ring cam. But if you do have an office, right, and you do have a meeting, like, and there's one person who's not in the room, everyone just like no office, right? Or at least put your laptops up and have the full face view so you can see like the people in the Brady Bunch view, so you can have like eye contact. Because the ring cam is really punishing to the people who aren't in the room. Yeah. Because you make the faces like this small, and it's just.
Just so I understand, when you say ring cam, you mean where it's like small, no one person is on main screen?
Oh, ring cam is like,
Sorry, I didn't know what it is.
See, GitLab doesn't have an office. They're like, ring cam, explain like, it's like you all together. So the ring cam is like this, it's like a 360 camera, and then has this like AI thing that like puts people's faces on, but it always gets it wrong. So you're talking to someone's shoulder, and then like the other guy's, it's like a wide angle lens. The person's face is really small, and then someone walks up to look at the screen, and you see his butt, and like.
Sounds awful.
And they're like, oh, you're remote. Watch this, a ring cam. It's like, yeah.
Noted.
Yeah, ring cam?
No,
yeah.
I'm just saying, like, okay, got it.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll watch out.
There's that one guy in Toronto who's like, yes! It's like, sorry.
We had one of those. We had a Vancouver, Stuart Butterfield lived in Vancouver for the early years of Slack. And so we had over our water fountain, like the water bubbler, a portal into the Vancouver office. But it was fun because it was in both barista areas. So like as you're just going, you could feel like, oh, there's the Vancouver office. And sometimes you can say hi, and most of the time you just hear their espressos being made. It was cute, but I totally hear you on that's hard for remote people. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. We'll have some more questions for the audience, but before that, I'm curious, are there any tools that you feel like your company is using in a really unique or different way that you'd want to share about? Especially in light of remote work?
Well, for us, as I've said before, we use GitLab runs on GitLab, not just the software, but also our business processes. So we use the issues and project management for everything. And so that includes marketing workflows, that includes finance, legal. And that's been really interesting, I think, because, and this is the first time I've experienced working in a company where everyone's in the same place for reals. And what I've noticed is when people first join the company, it's like, and let's say they're not engineers or non-technical, they'll be like, oh, I'm going to be using a Git system, like this is really like, okay. But they learn so fast, and very quickly it's just not scary anymore, and the value of like, you know, the version control, the value of having everything in one place like starts showing up. And so I think what we're doing with GitLab, you could probably do with something else, but this concept of literally everybody in the company, all of you be in the same place, I think is really powerful. And I think slowly everybody is going to go in that direction.
Two tools that we use a lot that have been super helpful for including people that are remote are Notion and Coda. Notion is great. Probably a lot of you use it as well in terms of creating spaces that are shared that people can go to for finding information. And then for Coda, we're actually using it for a lot of our product tracking in terms of roadmap and what's next. And one thing that we're able to do is sort of have this like live experience while we do a crawl every week of what's going on to make sure we all have updates and we're all in sync. And during that crawl, people can basically have like a raise hand function in the Coda doc. And this has eliminated so much, like it saved so much time in this meeting and also made it so it's more inclusive of people that are not in the room.
Very cool.
We have this little app called Donut on Slack, which matches people to talk to each other, even though they're in different offices. So they're just like one thing. I just have like a little product strategy comment to. There's a danger if you use the tool that's not really specialized. Right. Like we probably have the same urge. Like productboard, you know, you can do everything in it as well. Sure. Marketing and engineering, and there's the danger of dogfooding in a way that is not really aligned with your focus, because it creates this kind of natural engineers see, oh, we could improve it because we need this thing for our unique engineering needs. And I'm just like, that's great, but that's not what we're after right now. So maybe one day we'll get there, so just stay focused. So anyway, it's just like something I
hear you. I definitely hear you. I think that also goes back to what the company vision may be, right? And it's like, GitLab is well known for we are covering the entire software development and delivery lifecycle, which is wide. And so it's intentional, I would say. But I hear the tension absolutely, because it's like, who is this specific feature for? But the part I'm talking about, I think plays out more in the like project management issue board side of things. So I think it works out okay, but totally hear you.
I guess this is a weird one, which is like, because for a strong engineering culture, especially a Silicon Valley culture, there's something that people don't use phones very much. I don't know if you ever noticed that. And I think in a remote, because if you're like from other places like New York or LA, everyone's like on the phone, like they're calling. They're not texting, they're like calling on the phone.
It weirds me out.
Why
would people call people on the phone?
I'm a caller. I call people. They always think it's an emergency.
I've also started.
They always pick up. It's great.
Calling's great. Yeah, calling's actually quite a useful tool.
Yeah.
And I think when you're distributed, because like if you don't, right, it's all on calendars and things like that. Like we have one button you can hit a Zoom if you want to discuss something, but the person has to be in the channel, right? And you have to be like blah blah blah.
Sure.
And Discord's got some nice stuff for that, but you're not always on your Discord thing. But just like calling people on the phone, because otherwise like you have to wait a long time, right? So there's sort of two things. There's sort of calling the phone, and the thing that we do in our leadership team is every 24 hours we have like a 10-minute meeting where we can get rid of any sort of administrative stuff.
Like a stand-up?
It's not a stand-up. It's sort of like asks and heads up, and you just kind of do it real quick. But it's like it's an administrative sync. It's not so much like status reporting, because we use a /standup command for that. But it's just sort of like just every 24 hours. So I like two things. One, don't interrupt me. You can always like reach me in 24 hours, or so it's administrative, right? Just back and forth. Or it's like you just call people, and it's not just like the exec team, but it's like other folks, because people are just sitting there by themselves, remote, and they're like, oh, I don't know how to solve this problem. It's like, if only I could talk to someone. It's like, what is this? No. It's like, Yeah, so it's like, if only had some device to communicate, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's weird.
That's awesome. We just added a feature called Workflow Builder to Slack. This is a unique, interesting one if you're looking for like fun, different things that allows you to basically build like IFT or Zapier style if this then that triggers and workflows, and they can be really robust. One of our customers built basically like a choose your own adventure Jurassic Park themed almost like a book or like story that you could follow along in Slack. It was really cool. Basically, like based on your emoji reactions to an initial message, it then gives you a next message, but it branches like 50 ways and becomes a ton of messages. And so it's funny, like that's not the for work. We were expecting this to be like a customer ticket comes in, you tag it with this emoji or this response, and therefore it's filtered into that bucket of customer support respondents. That would be a really easy workflow you'd build through Slack. This one was like, it's really fun. People like to have fun and do interesting things with their tools on top of like effective work things. Having fun at work is important. So one question from the audience. As teams grow, how do you ensure best practices are upheld? I feel like, Ian, you have a really good set of like, these are not best practices, these are best practices, but as you scale, as you go from 100 people and beyond, how do you think about really maintaining those best practices and etiquette?
I'm just going to steal totally from GitLab, which is, the one thing I was talking about with GitLab folks is the concept that when you have culture, you write it down, right? And then on the onboarding, right, like when someone walks into your office, like walks into your company, you have this like checklist of things, right? And you have sort of like all the stuff they read, and this defines how we work, and that defines our culture and our behaviors. And you think that culture is better in an office, but it's actually better when it's written down, because you can sort of like hyperscale, right? Because everyone goes through a consistent experience, they have the same expectations, and everything's written down. So I think that's how you sort of do the culture, is that it's part of the onboarding, right? So everyone has a consistent experience, and it's very deliberate. So I think that's that's what we've learned from GitLab, and we're doing.
Yeah.
That is awesome. I agree with you that writing it down, having that checklist like consistent for everyone is crucial. In addition, in my personal experience and work, what I've noticed is modeling from the exec team is very important. So Sid actually does a great job of this. Is like he records things, he puts the process down, and then he consistently acts like that. And then the other execs are similar, but with their own nuances built in. And I found myself actually modeling the different nuances. So I think it's very important for it to like trickle down in a way. Again, a phrase that's not loved, but it's a thing that happens. And so the leadership can really take control of what they want to see, and they just need to stay conscious, and they need to keep telling their reports. It's like, it's kind of like a waterfall, and it's very important regardless of whether you're remote or not. Actually, more if you're remote, because the actions show so much more when it's a all remote culture.
I'll provide a contrasting opinion. I think like there's cultural norms that are really important when it comes to people that are not in the office, and you have to instill those as soon as you have like one person who's not in your office, and you have to make sure people are considerate of that person, and you have to scale that as more people are remote. But I think some chaos is okay. I don't think it has to be like this like top-down regimented, here are the programs we use, here's what we don't use, here's the workflow, Slack is only for exceptions. I think like chaos is all right, and people learn best practices from each other. So we've embraced like lots of different tools of Figma, let people bring things in bottom up. We're definitely not trying to like make it completely chaotic, but we're more on that side, I'd say.
I think it's just that it needs to be part of the culture that it's okay to change the process, and then it's written down. It's not like you can't touch it, right? So I frequently tell the stories like, hey, we had this process, but somebody else came up with a better idea. So constantly question that what's written down, but then document, obviously, explain why to others.
No, I absolutely agree that the process or culture should be like very changeable, and that's definitely like everything's an iterative process. I think. The nuance I was getting at was more like almost like behaviors. People start like emulating leadership behaviors. It happens to me. I never thought it. I was like, I'm this independent person, think for myself all the time. But I noticed over that you start modeling behaviors, and so that's just a factor to consider.
I completely agree with.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for all of your insights and thoughts. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.